As an author, probably the question that I get asked the most is, where do your ideas come from? You people, you're so creative. And the truth is that ideas come from a number of different sources. And a lot of ideas come into play in writing a novel or in writing a screenplay. Recently, I had a man who came up to me while I was at the gym, and we got talking, and he said, you know, you're a writer. I've had this great idea for a novel. I've had it for 7 years. I've been wanting to write this book. It came to me in a very vivid dream, and I really want to get this out. And he says, I'll tell you what, I'll tell you my idea. You can write the book, and we'll split the money. How does that sound? 50-50. And I said, no, thank you. I've got too many ideas. I couldn't take another one, and I don't even want to hear it. You know, it's because it's your idea. You go write the book. And he says, well, maybe I'll probably never write it anyway. I'll tell you what. I'll just tell you the idea, and you tell me what you think. I had this dream about a woman with a green nose. So what's her story? He says, I don't know. She just had a green nose. And I could see that there was a conflict there. She may have had some sort of an illness that would cause a green nose. She may have had, for example, leprosy might cause her nose to be green. Certainly it would be something conspicuous, and it would leave her twisted and heartbroken for life. And I thought, okay, there's possibly a story in there. So I said, where does this woman come from? What time period are we talking about? Is this on planet Earth, or is this a fantasy world? He says, I don't know. He says, I think it was sometime a long time ago. All I know is that it seemed very vivid and very real to me, and I just felt like I had to write it. Well, guess what? That's not a book. It's not a screenplay. That's not even an idea for much of a character. It's part of an idea for a character. To write a story requires that you have not just one idea, but many ideas. It's sort of like putting a puzzle together. You know, very often when you open your box of puzzle pieces, you open it up and you go, oh, there we go. There's a woman there. I can see her face. I can see her hair. Well, you say, okay, that's not a puzzle. That's just a part of a puzzle. The problem is that with a novel or with a screenplay, we don't have just one idea floating around in our subconscious or stored in our brain. We may have tens of thousands of ideas. We have hundreds of puzzles that are all thrown together into one great big box. And now we're trying to figure out how to put this puzzle together. And so what we want to do with storytelling as a fine art, and when we get into this brainstorming in specific, is to decide, what pieces do I need to my puzzle? What pieces do I need to look for still? Where do I find those pieces? Is this piece really a good piece? Am I putting together the right puzzle in the first place? There's a lot that goes into brainstorming a story, and it's not just a puzzle with one piece or 5 pieces or 10 pieces. Even writing a really simple short story with just 2 characters will require probably 50 or 60 different pieces. Writing a large novel where you've got dozens of characters over 70 different settings may require as many as 1,000 pieces to your puzzle. So we're going to talk about, where do we get these pieces? How do we get them? How do we judge whether or not these pieces fit, whether they're worth even putting into this puzzle together in the first place? When you start writing a story, there's only actually 6 different parts to a story that you're going to be worried about with your brainstorming. The first part is the setting. Every story has to have a setting. Next, you have your characters that you're going to need to develop for your story. And each one of those characters is going to have to be developed, in some cases very in-depth. Sometimes they may just be lightly developed. Next, you're going to have your conflicts for your characters. What are the problems that your character is going to face? The next step that we're going to have is plotting. How are we going to put those elements together so that they form a consistent plot, a series of actions that characters are going to take to try to resolve their problems? The next element that we're going to deal with is theme. We have to decide, why is this story worth telling? What makes this a big story? How is it going to change the reader's life? Because ultimately, stories aren't about the characters. They're not about you as an author. Stories are about the reader, and we need to make sure that you reach your reader and get them excited by the story, get them engrossed, get them thinking about it when they don't have time to think about it, when they should be thinking about other things. They should be thinking about work or how to handle other problems, but that story becomes all important to them. And then last of all, we're going to talk a little bit about how you write that story, the choices that you're going to make in tone and in your own particular writing style. Your treatment of the story is what that's called. So we're going to talk about how we're going to treat the story, whether you're going to decide to write it in first person or third person, and how you're going to choose your scenes, that type of thing. So those are the 6 elements to brainstorming a story. Many authors, when they begin writing a story, they use what I call the wandering in the dark method. Years ago, award-winning author Aldous Budrus and I were talking about brainstorming, and I said, how do you brainstorm a story? He says, well, when I started out, I would get an idea for a novel, and then I would go out and take a long walk in the dark, and I would think about my novel while I walked. And I just laughed, because that was the method that I started out with too. I was wandering in the dark, trying to figure out whether or not this was going to work as a story and how I could put it together. And the truth is, I lost a lot of weight that way, but it didn't get much done in the way of writing stories. So we're going to try to take this method of looking at your story's components, fitting them together as puzzle pieces, and seeing, is there a better way for you to write the story quickly and easily? The average writer, when he writes a story, may compose it pretty quickly. My friend Orson Scott Card wrote a book, Ender's Game, years ago. And I asked him how long it took him to write it. And he said, about 2 weeks. And I was really shocked that he was able to write it that fast. But it wasn't much of a chore. He had written a novella years before that had won an award, and he had been thinking about it for 6 years. So the amount of time that he needed to spend thinking about the characters and the setting had already been done. He already knew what conflicts were going to be. He knew what the theme was. He knew how the story was going to be resolved. You need to get to that point too. You don't want to be wandering in the dark for the next 3 years trying to figure out what happens in your novel. With this course, we want to be able to ideally get you to the point where you'll be ready to start composing your work within 6 weeks.